The last thing Laura Vance expected when the blizzard descended on Boise, Idaho territory, was to wake up at all. She had been traveling alone in her wagon when the storm hit with a fury that seemed personal, as if God himself had decided her punishment was long overdue. The wind screamed through the mountain pass, turning the world into a whirling wall of white that erased everything she knew. Her horse had broken free hours ago, disappearing into the tempest, leaving her trapped in a wooden prison that was quickly becoming a tomb. The cold seeped through every crack, through the canvas cover that flapped violently against its bindings, through her 3 layers of wool that now felt as thin as muslin. Her fingers had gone numb first, then her toes, and now she could barely feel her legs. Laura did not pray. She had stopped praying 2 years ago when her husband and infant daughter died within days of each other from scarlet fever. She had stopped praying when the bank took their homestead. She had stopped praying when her own family turned their backs on her for refusing to remarry the widower they had chosen, a man twice her age with hands that lingered too long. At 24 years old, Laura Vance had learned that prayers went nowhere, that faith was a luxury for those who had not yet been broken by life's cruelties. So when the darkness came, she simply closed her eyes and waited. The sound that woke her was not heavenly. It was the whinny of a horse and the crunch of boots through deep snow. Then rough hands were pulling at the wagon cover and frigid air rushed in, and a voice was saying words she could not quite understand through the fog in her mind. Still breathing. "Good Lord, woman, what are you doing out here alone?" She wanted to tell him it was none of his business, but her jaw would not work properly. Strong arms lifted her, and she felt herself being carried through the biting wind. She caught a glimpse of a face half hidden by a thick scarf, eyes the color of mountain stone, before she lost consciousness again. When Laura woke the second time, heat surrounded her. Not the gentle warmth of a normal fire, but an almost painful intensity that made her skin prickle and burn. She was in a bed, buried under what felt like a dozen furs and wool blankets. The room was small but solidly built, log walls chinked tight against the wind that still howled outside. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames dancing high and bright. "You are awake." Laura turned her head, wincing at the stiffness in her neck. The man sat in a rough-hewn chair near the fire, watching her with those same gray eyes she had glimpsed before. He was big, she realized, broad-shouldered and tall even sitting down. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and fell past his collar. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but she could see he was younger than she had first thought. Maybe early 30s at most. He wore simple clothes, a homespun shirt and worn trousers, but they were clean. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as a croak. "My cabin, about 8 miles north of Boise up in the foothills." He stood and crossed to a small table, pouring something from a pot into a tin cup. "Can you sit up? You need to drink this." Laura struggled upright, keeping the blankets clutched around her. She was still wearing her dress, she noted with relief, though her boots and outer layers were gone. The man handed her the cup, and she smelled beef broth, rich and salty. "Drink it slow," he instructed. "Your body has been through hell." She sipped obediently, the hot liquid burning down her throat in the most wonderful way. "How long?" "I found you yesterday afternoon. It is near evening now, so about a day." He returned to his chair, giving her space. "The storm passed this morning." "You were fortunate I was checking my trap lines when I was, or you would have frozen solid in that wagon." "My things," Laura said suddenly, remembering the few possessions she had left in the world. "All here. I brought the wagon down once the weather cleared enough." "Your horse is long gone, I am afraid." He paused. "I am Henry Nash, by the way. I trap and hunt these mountains." "Laura Vance." She took another sip of broth, feeling strength slowly returning to her limbs. "I thank you for your kindness, Mr. Nash. I will be on my way as soon as I am able." "On your way to where?" His voice was curious, not judgmental. "Forgive me, but there is nothing much north of here except more mountains and eventually the mining camps, and those are no place for a woman alone. I was heading south, actually, to Boise." Laura set the cup down on the small table beside the bed. "I have prospects of work there, a boarding house looking for help." Henry leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You were heading south." "Miss Vance, when I found you, your wagon was pointed north, and you were a good 10 miles off the main road." The words hit her like a physical blow. She had been so turned around in the storm, so completely lost. Another few hours and she would have been even further into the wilderness. "I did not realize," she said quietly. "The mountain will do that in a blizzard. No shame in it." Henry stood again, moving to the fireplace to add another log. "You are welcome to stay here until you are recovered. I have supplies enough for two for a while, and the storm may have more to give before winter truly settles in. I cannot impose on you, Mr. Nash. You are not imposing. I am offering." He turned to face her, and there was something in his expression that was neither pity nor expectation, just simple human kindness. It had been so long since Laura had seen that look directed at her that she almost did not recognize it. "Besides, you are in no condition to travel yet. Your feet took some frostbite. Not bad enough to lose anything, but bad enough that you need to rest them for at least a week." Laura looked down at her feet beneath the blankets, wiggling her toes experimentally. They ached, a deep burning ache that confirmed his words. Despair threatened to swallow her. She had so little money left, barely enough to survive until she could secure the boarding house position. A week's delay could mean losing the opportunity entirely. "I can see you thinking yourself in circles," Henry said, not unkindly. "How about this? You rest for a few days, help me around here with cooking and such if you are able, and when you are well enough, I will take you down to Boise myself. I was planning a supply run soon anyway." "Why are you helping me?" The question came out sharper than Laura intended. "You do not know me." "I could be anyone." Henry was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. 3 years ago, I was caught in an avalanche up near the peaks, buried under snow, sure I was going to die. A Shoshone trapper found me, dug me out, took me back to his camp. I asked him the same thing you just asked me." He focused on her again. "He said that the mountains are hard enough without us being hard on each other. I figure he was right." Laura felt something crack in her chest, some small piece of the ice she had built around her heart. She nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Nash. I accept your kindness." "Henry, please. Mr. Nash makes me sound like a schoolmaster." A small smile tugged at his bearded mouth. "I will make us some supper. You rest." Over the next few days, Laura began to understand the rhythm of Henry Nash's life. He rose before dawn, built up the fire, and checked the weather. If conditions allowed, he would head out to check his trap lines, returning by midday with whatever the mountain had provided. Rabbit, mostly, sometimes marten or fox for their pelts. He was efficient and respectful with the animals, wasting nothing. The cabin was simple, but showed signs of careful craftsmanship. Henry had built it himself, he told her, after he had left his family's farm in Ohio 5 years ago. He had come west seeking something he could not quite name, tried his hand at mining for a year, and then discovered he preferred the solitude of the mountains to the chaos of the camps. "You get lonely?" Laura asked one afternoon. She was sitting in the chair by the fire, mending one of his shirts that had torn on a branch. Her feet were healing well, the burning sensation fading to a dull throb. Henry looked up from the pelt he was stretching. "Sometimes, but there is a difference between being alone and being lonely." I was lonely on my family's farm, surrounded by people who never understood me. Up here, I am alone, but I am content. I think I understand that, Laura said softly. She had felt desperately lonely in her marriage, she realized now. Her husband had been a good man in many ways, but they had never truly connected, never found that spark that the romantic novels her mother had forbidden her to read had promised. Their marriage had been practical, expected, and ultimately hollow, even before tragedy struck. "What about you?" Henry asked. "You have not spoken much about yourself." Laura's hand stilled on the fabric. She had been dreading this question, knowing it would come eventually. "There is not much to tell. I am a widow. My husband and daughter died 2 years ago. I lost our land. My family and I had a disagreement about my future, so I am starting over in Boise." It was the bare bones of her story, stripped of all the pain and anger and grief that still lived in her bones. But Henry did not press for more. He simply nodded and said, "I am sorry for your losses." What struck Laura most was that he sounded like he meant it. Not the performative sympathy she had endured from her family's church friends, the kind that came wrapped in judgment and advice she had never asked for. Just genuine sorrow that she had suffered. "Thank you," she managed. That night, after they had eaten a simple supper of rabbit stew and the last of Henry's stored potatoes, Laura found herself actually talking. Really talking, in a way she had not done since before her husband had fallen ill. She told Henry about her daughter, sweet little Margaret, who had been only 8 months old when the fever took her. She told him about the way her family had treated her grief as something to be rushed through, as if mourning had a proper schedule that she was failing to keep. "They wanted me to marry again within 6 months," she said, staring into her cup of chicory coffee. "Said it was unseemly for a young woman to be alone. The man they chose was 53 years old and already had 7 children. He looked at me like I was a brood mare he was considering purchasing. So you left." It was not a question, so I left. Took what little I had and headed west. I heard Idaho territory had opportunities, that Boise was growing and needed people willing to work hard. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I made it most of the way before nearly dying in a snowstorm." "You made it," Henry corrected. "That takes strength, and you are still here, still fighting. That takes even more." Laura looked at him across the small cabin, this strange mountain man who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return. He was watching her with those steady gray eyes, and there was something in his gaze that made her feel seen in a way she had not been in years. Maybe ever. "I stopped praying," she found herself confessing. "After Margaret died. I prayed so hard for God to save her, made every bargain I could think of. But she died anyway, and then my husband followed, and the bank took our home, and my family turned cold. So I stopped believing that anyone up there was listening." Henry was quiet for a long moment. "I cannot tell you what to believe," he finally said, "but I will say this. The mountain has taught me that there is something bigger than us out there. Maybe it is God, maybe it is just the way everything fits together. But when I see a sunrise painting these peaks gold, or find you alive when you should have been dead, I think maybe there is more to the world than just random chance." "You think God led you to me?" Laura asked, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. "I think something did. Call it what you want." He stood, stretching his tall frame. "I am not a preaching man, Laura. I left that behind with my father's church back in Ohio. But I have seen enough out here to believe that giving up on everything, including hope, is just another way of dying." His words stayed with Laura long after she had settled into the bed that night, Henry having made himself a bedroll near the fire as he had done every night since she had been here. She thought about hope, about faith, about whether there was any difference between the two. She had given up on both, she realized, and the admission felt like something important. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of crystalline winter day that made everything sharp and bright. Laura's feet were feeling much better, and she insisted on helping Henry with more than just the indoor chores. "You do not have to do this," he protested as she wrapped herself in her repaired coat and the extra furs he had given her. "I know, but I want to." Laura pulled on the thick mittens he had made from rabbit fur. "Besides, I have been cooped up for days. I need to move." Henry showed her how to check the closer trap lines, the ones within a mile of the cabin. He taught her how to walk in snowshoes, how to read the signs of animal passage, how to reset a trap without getting caught in it herself. Laura found herself fascinated by the wilderness knowledge he possessed, the way he moved through the forest like he was part of it. "You are a good teacher," she said as they headed back to the cabin, two rabbits hanging from Henry's pack. "You are a quick learner." He paused, pointing to a set of tracks in the snow. "See those? Elk, big bull probably. He passed through here this morning." Laura studied the prints, the way they sank deep into the snow. "How can you tell it is a bull?" Size of the tracks, spacing of the stride. A cow would be smaller and the tracks would be different if there were calves around. Henry crouched down, examining the tracks more closely. He was moving slow, browsing. Not spooked. They continued on, and Laura realized she was enjoying herself. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she was not dwelling on the past or dreading the future. She was simply present in this moment, walking through the snow with this quiet man who asked nothing of her except her company. Back at the cabin, Laura prepared the rabbits while Henry worked on his pelts. They had fallen into an easy rhythm, working side by side in comfortable silence broken by occasional conversation. It felt domestic in a way that Laura had never experienced in her actual marriage, and the realization was both comforting and terrifying. "Tell me about your family," she said as she set the meat to slow roast over the fire. "You mentioned your father's church." Henry's hands paused in their work. "Not much to tell that is pleasant. My father is a fire and brimstone preacher, the kind who sees sin in everything that brings joy. My mother died when I was 12, and he remarried within 3 months to a woman who made it clear I was an inconvenient reminder of his first wife. I have 3 half-siblings I barely know. That must have been hard. It made me who I am, taught me to rely on myself, to find peace in solitude." He resumed, stretching the pelt. "My father wanted me to follow him into preaching, but I could never reconcile his version of God with the world I saw around me. He preached about a vengeful deity who kept score, but I kept thinking that if God made the mountains and the forests, maybe he was more interested in beauty than judgment." Laura sat down heavily in her chair, struck by his words. "That is a lovely thought." "It is what I choose to believe anyway." Henry glanced at her. "I figure if there is a God, he is big enough to handle my doubts and questions. And if there is not, well, I have still tried to live a good life. That has to count for something." "You are a better person than you give yourself credit for," Laura said quietly. "You saved my life and asked for nothing. You have fed me and housed me and treated me with more respect than my own family did." "That is a low bar to clear," Henry said, and there was an edge to his voice that Laura had not heard before. "Your family should have supported you. Grief is not something to be scheduled or controlled. Losing a child." He stopped, shaking his head. "I cannot imagine that pain. But I know enough to know that you deserved compassion, not judgment." Tears pricked at Laura's eyes, hot and unexpected. "Thank you," she whispered. They did not speak much for the rest of the afternoon, but something had shifted between them. Some wall had come down, leaving them both more exposed and somehow safer for it. That evening, after supper, Henry pulled out a battered harmonica and began to play. The melody was slow and sweet, a tune Laura vaguely recognized from her childhood. She closed her eyes and listened, letting the music wash over her. "That was beautiful," she said when he finished. "My mother taught me. It was one of the few things my father let me keep of hers after she died." Henry ran his thumb over the instrument, his expression distant. "Sometimes, when the silence gets too heavy, I play and pretend she is listening." Laura felt her heart crack a little more. This man, this strong, self-sufficient mountain man, still carried his grief with him just as she did. Maybe everyone did. Maybe that was part of being human. "Will you play another?" she asked. He did, and then another, and Laura found herself humming along to some of the melodies. Her voice was rusty from disuse, but Henry smiled when he heard it, and that made her want to sing louder. It was the best evening Laura had experienced in 2 years. The following days blurred together in a way that felt both too fast and perfectly timeless. Laura's feet healed completely, which meant she could no longer justify extending her stay. She should ask Henry to take her to Boise. She should start her new life, find that boarding house job, build something resembling a future. But she found excuse after excuse to delay. The weather was uncertain. Henry had mentioned a big storm coming. Her boots needed another day to dry properly after getting wet. Anything to keep from leaving this small cabin that had somehow become a sanctuary. Henry never pushed, never asked when she wanted to leave. But Laura caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she could not quite read, something between hope and resignation. One afternoon, they were out checking the far trap lines when the sky suddenly darkened. Henry swore under his breath, something Laura had rarely heard him do. "We need to get back. Now." He was already turning, moving fast through the snow. Laura hurried after him, but she could see the storm rolling in like a living thing, clouds black and heavy. The wind picked up, sending snow swirling from the trees. They were still 2 miles from the cabin when the blizzard hit in earnest. "There is a hunter's shelter near here," Henry shouted over the wind. "Follow close behind me. Do not lose sight of me." Laura grabbed onto his pack, keeping her eyes fixed on his broad back as he pushed forward through the rapidly worsening conditions. The world turned white again, just like the storm that had nearly killed her, and fear clawed at her throat. But this time, she was not alone. Henry found the shelter more by instinct than sight. A small cave-like overhang that someone had improved with stacked rocks, and a rough door made of lashed branches. He pulled Laura inside, and the sudden absence of wind felt like a physical relief. The space was tiny, barely big enough for them both to sit with their backs against the stone. Henry immediately began building a small fire with supplies left in the shelter for this exact purpose. Laura had seen evidence of the mountain code during her time here, the way trappers and hunters left resources for each other in case of emergency. It was its own kind of faith, she thought. Belief that kindness would be repaid if not to you, then to someone else who needed it. The fire caught, and warmth began to fill the small space. Henry shrugged off his pack and pulled out the emergency supplies he always carried. Dried meat, a small tin pot, a bladder of water that had not yet frozen. "We will be fine," he said, and Laura believed him. "The storm will blow itself out by morning. We have shelter, fire, food, all we need." But as night fell and the temperature dropped despite the fire, Laura began to shiver. Henry noticed immediately and moved closer, wrapping one of the furs around both of them. "Body heat is the best defense against the cold," he said. But there was something different in his voice, a slight tremor that had nothing to do with the temperature. Laura found herself pressed against his side, feeling the solid warmth of him through their layers of clothing. Her heart was beating too fast, and she knew it was not just from the cold or the fear of the storm. "Henry," she said softly. "Yes. Why did you really bring me to your cabin? You could have taken me straight to Boise once the storm cleared." She felt him tense beside her, then slowly relax. "Honestly, at first it was just about saving your life. But then you woke up and you were fierce and broken and trying so hard to hide how scared you were, and I—" He trailed off. "You what?" Laura turned to look at him in the firelight. "I wanted to know you, really know you. And I knew if I took you straight to town, I would never see you again." Henry met her gaze, and the naked honesty in his eyes made her breath catch. "I know I had no right. I know it was selfish. But I could not let you go without at least trying to understand why finding you felt like something important." Laura's mind was racing, her heart pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "I stayed," she whispered. "Even after my feet healed, I kept finding reasons to stay." "Why?" The question was barely audible. "Because I have not felt alive in 2 years. Not until I woke up in your cabin and saw you watching me like I was a person, not a problem to be solved or a scandal to be managed." Laura's eyes burned with unshed tears. "Because when I am with you, I remember what it feels like to hope." Henry's hand came up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and cupped her cheek. His palm was rough and warm, and Laura leaned into the touch like a flower seeking sun. "I am falling in love with you," he said, and the words were rough with emotion. "I know it is too soon and too crazy, and you probably think I am out of my mind, but I have to say it. I am falling in love with you, Laura Vance, and it terrifies me and thrills me in equal measure." Laura could not breathe, could not think. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such raw vulnerability. Her husband had courted her with flowers and proper words and careful respect, but never this kind of soul-deep honesty. "I do not know how to do this," she confessed. "I do not know how to let myself feel again. What if I lose you too? What if I let myself love you and it all falls apart? Then we will have had something beautiful for however long it lasts." Henry's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "I am not asking for promises or forever, Laura. I am just asking for a chance to see if this feeling between us is real." Laura thought about faith, about prayer, about the God she had stopped believing in. She thought about how Henry had appeared in the storm like an answer she had not known she was seeking. She thought about hope and second chances, and whether she was brave enough to reach for them. Then she stopped thinking and kissed him. It was tentative at first, a question more than a statement. But Henry responded with a tenderness that made her heart ache, his lips gentle against hers, his hand still cradling her face like she was something precious. Laura felt something inside her shatter and rebuild all at once, some fundamental shift in the landscape of her soul. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Laura rested her forehead against his. "I am terrified," she admitted. "Me too." Henry's other arm came around her, holding her close. "But I would rather be terrified with you than safe and alone." They sat like that as the storm raged outside, wrapped in each other's warmth, and Laura felt the ice around her heart begin to thaw. She had thought she was frozen solid, beyond saving, but maybe that had never been true. Maybe she had just been waiting for someone who could stoke the fire hot enough to melt the walls she had built. "Tell me something," Laura said after a while. "Something you have never told anyone." Henry was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "Then, when I first came to these mountains, I was running away from more than just my father. I was engaged to a woman back in Ohio. Sweet girl, daughter of one of the church elders. Everyone said we were perfect together." He paused. "But I did not love her. I cared about her, but I did not love her, and the thought of spending my whole life pretending was suffocating me. So I left, wrote her a letter explaining, paid back her father the money he had given me for our future farm, and disappeared west." "Do you regret it?" Laura asked. Not for a single moment. It was the most honest thing I had ever done. Henry's chest rose and fell against her back, but it made me afraid to try again, afraid that I was not capable of real love, that I would just hurt anyone who tried to get close. So I came up here and told myself I was better off alone. And now I know I was wrong. I am capable of love. I just had not met the right person yet. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Your turn. Tell me something no one knows. Laura swallowed hard. Sometimes I am angry at Margaret for dying. I know it is awful and she was just a baby and it was not her fault, but sometimes I am so furious that she left me. That she and her father both left me, and I had to figure out how to survive without them. And then, I hate myself for feeling that way. Grief is not rational, Henry said softly. And anger is part of grieving. You are allowed to feel everything you feel, Laura. The love and the anger and the sorrow. All of it. Something broke loose in Laura's chest, and she started to cry. Really cry. In a way she had not let herself do since the funerals. Henry just held her, rocking her gently, murmuring quiet words of comfort. He did not try to fix it or tell her to stop or remind her of all the reasons she should be grateful. He just gave her space to fall apart. When the tears finally subsided, Laura felt wrung out but somehow lighter. Thank you, she said, her voice hoarse. Always, Henry replied. They talked through most of the night, sharing stories and secrets and dreams. Laura learned that Henry wanted to build a bigger cabin someday, maybe start a small ranch with cattle and horses. That he loved to read but had very few books and treasured the ones he had. That his favorite color was the particular shade of blue the sky turned just before dawn in the mountains. She told him about her childhood, about the little sister she had adored who died of influenza when Laura was 15. About her love of music and how she had once dreamed of learning to play the piano. About her fear that she was fundamentally broken, that losing her husband and daughter had damaged something essential in her spirit. You are not broken, Henry said firmly. You are wounded, and there is a difference. Broken things cannot be repaired. Wounded things heal. Do you really believe that? Laura asked. I do. And I think you are already healing, even if you cannot see it yet. By the time the storm passed and weak morning light filtered into the shelter, Laura felt like she had been remade. She and Henry emerged into a world transformed by fresh snow. Everything clean and bright and new. The walk back to the cabin took longer than usual, both of them tired from the sleepless night. But Henry held her hand the whole way, and Laura marveled at how such a simple touch could feel so profound. Back at the cabin, they fell into bed together, fully clothed, too exhausted for anything but sleep. Laura curled into Henry's arms, and for the first time in years she felt safe. Not just physically safe from the cold and the storms, but emotionally safe. Safe enough to be vulnerable, safe enough to hope. She woke in the afternoon to find Henry watching her, his gray eyes soft with affection. Hi, she said sleepily. Hi yourself. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. How are you feeling? Good, really good actually. Laura stretched, wincing at her stiff muscles. What time is it? About 3, I would guess. We slept hard. Henry sat up and Laura immediately missed his warmth. Are you hungry? I can make something. I can help. Laura stood, surprised by how natural it felt to be here with him like this, as if they had been together for years instead of just over a week. They prepared a simple meal together, moving around the small cabin with an easy coordination. Laura found herself humming, and Henry smiled when he heard it. That is the 3rd time today you have done that, he observed. Done what? Hummed, sang a little. You have a beautiful voice. Laura felt her cheeks warm. I used to sing all the time when I was young. In the church choir around the house, but after. She did not need to finish the sentence. Maybe it is time to start singing again, Henry suggested gently, so Laura did. She sang as she cooked, old hymns and folk songs, and even a bawdy tavern tune her father would have been scandalized to know she knew. Henry laughed at that one, and the sound was so rich and genuine that Laura wanted to bottle it. After they ate, Henry pulled out his harmonica again and they made music together. Laura's voice wove around the notes, harmony and melody dancing together in the small cabin. It felt like prayer, Laura realized. Not the desperate, bargaining prayers she had offered up when Margaret was dying, but something purer. Gratitude, maybe, or simply acknowledgement of beauty. When the last notes faded, Laura found herself thinking about God for the first time in 2 years without bitterness. Maybe faith was not about getting what you prayed for. Maybe it was about believing that even in the darkest moments, there was still light somewhere waiting to be found. "What are you thinking about?" Henry asked. "Prayer," Laura admitted, "and how maybe I gave up too soon." Henry set down his harmonica. "What changed? You did." "This did." Laura gestured around the cabin, trying to encompass everything that had happened. "I thought God had abandoned me, but maybe I had just stopped being able to see his hand in things. You found me in that storm, Henry. Against all odds, you were exactly where you needed to be exactly when you needed to be there. Maybe that is not just luck." "Maybe not," Henry agreed. "Or maybe God works through people willing to listen. I almost did not go out that day. The storm was already starting and I thought about staying put, but something made me go check the northern lines. An instinct, a feeling, call it what you will. An answer to a prayer I did not even know I was praying," Laura said softly. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire. Then Henry said, "I do not want to take you to Boise." Laura's heart skipped. "What? I mean, I will if that is what you want. I promised I would, and I keep my promises." He turned to face her fully. "But I want you to stay, here with me. I know it is crazy and we have only known each other a short time, but I have never been more sure of anything. Stay, Laura. Build a life with me in these mountains." Laura's mind reeled. Stay here. Give up on Boise, on the boarding house job, on the plan she had made for starting over. It was insane. It was impulsive. It was the opposite of every careful, practical decision she had made in her life. "I have nothing," she heard herself say. "No money, no prospects. I would just be a burden." "You are not a burden. You are a partner." Henry took her hands in his. "I am not asking you to be some kept woman. I am asking you to help me build something here. Expand the trapping, maybe start that small ranch I mentioned. We could run it together, equal partners in everything. And yes, I am asking for more than that too. I am asking you to be my wife if you will have me. Henry, we barely know each other. I know enough. I know you are strong and brave and kind. I know you make me laugh and make me think and make me want to be a better man. I know that when I imagine my future now, you are in it." His thumbs rubbed circles on her hands. "But I also know you have been hurt and you need time, so I am not asking for an answer right now. I am just asking you to think about it. Stay through the winter at least. Get to know me. Get to know this life. And then, when spring comes, decide if you want to stay forever or if you want me to take you wherever you want to go." Laura felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "You would really let me go, even after everything? If that is what you needed to be happy, yes. I love you, Laura." And love means wanting the other person's happiness, even if it is not with you. Henry smiled, though his eyes were suspiciously bright. "But I am going to do everything in my power to make you want to stay." Laura laughed through her tears. "That hardly seems fair." "I never claim to fight fair when it comes to matters of the heart." She leaned forward and kissed him, tasting salt from her tears. "Okay," she whispered against his lips. "Okay, you will stay through the winter?" Henry asked hopefully. "Okay, I will marry you." The shock on his face would have been comical if the moment was not so tender. "What? Laura, I said you could take time and think about it." "I do not need time. I have been half dead for 2 years just going through the motions. You brought me back to life, Henry. You made me believe in hope and goodness and maybe even God again. I do not need time to know that I want to spend the rest of my days with you." Henry crushed her to him, and Laura could feel him trembling. "Are you sure? I need you to be sure, because once you are mine, I am never letting you go." "I am sure." And the amazing thing was, she was. For the first time since losing her family, Laura was absolutely certain about something. "I love you, Henry Nash. It is too soon and too crazy, but I love you, and I want to build a life with you in these mountains." Henry pulled back just enough to kiss her properly, deeply, with all the passion and promise that words could not capture. Laura kissed him back with everything she had, pouring 2 years of grief and loneliness and frozen hope into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she rested her forehead against his. "When?" she asked. "When what?" "When do you want to get married?" Henry laughed. "I had not thought that far ahead. I expected to have to convince you for months. There is a minister in Boise who rides a circuit through the mountain communities. He will be back through in about 6 weeks, depending on the weather. We could make it official then." "6 weeks," Laura repeated, tasting the words. In 6 weeks, she would be Laura Nash. The thought filled her with a joy she had forgotten was possible. "That gives us time to prepare, to make this cabin ready for a wife." "Our cabin," Henry corrected. "Everything I have is yours now. Everything I am is yours." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, dreaming aloud about their future. Henry showed Laura the piece of land he owned, a section he had filed on through the Homestead Act. Beyond the cabin, there were meadows that could support cattle in the summer, forests rich with game, a creek that ran year-round. "We could build a bigger house eventually," Henry said, pointing to a spot that would have a view of the valley below. "Something with real rooms, a proper kitchen for you, maybe a porch where we could sit in the evenings." "Children?" Laura asked tentatively, barely daring to hope. Henry's expression softened. "As many as God sees fit to bless us with, if you want them." "I do. I am terrified after losing Margaret, but I do want them." Laura took a shaky breath. "Will you think less of me if I mourn her even while loving new children?" "Never. She was your daughter, Laura. You will carry her in your heart forever, and that is exactly as it should be." Henry pulled her close. "Any children we have will have the most loving mother in the world, precisely because you know how precious they are." Laura buried her face in his chest, overwhelmed by emotion. How had she gotten so lucky? How had she gone from freezing to death in a wagon to being held by this incredible man who saw all her broken pieces and loved her anyway? "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For finding me. For saving me. For loving me." "Thank you for letting me," Henry replied. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and deepening love. Henry took Laura to Boise to purchase fabric for a wedding dress and to meet with the minister and arrange the ceremony. The town was bigger than Laura had expected, bustling with miners, farmers, and merchants. It would have been easy to disappear into it, to find work and independence just as she had planned. But as they rode back up into the mountains, Laura felt only relief. Boise was fine for those who wanted it, but her home was in the foothills with Henry. They fell into a rhythm of work and companionship that felt as natural as breathing. Laura proved to have a knack for preparing pelts, and her cooking transformed their simple meals into something approaching fine dining, at least by mountain standards. Henry taught her to shoot, to track, to read the weather signs. Laura taught him the songs she remembered from her childhood, and they sang together in the evenings. They also talked, endlessly, about everything and nothing. Henry wanted to know everything about her, from her favorite season to her deepest fears. Laura discovered he had a wicked sense of humor that emerged once he felt comfortable, and that he thought deeply about questions of right and wrong in ways that put her family's rigid church teachings to shame. And they touched. Chaste touches mostly, holding hands and stolen kisses, but always with the promise of more once they were properly married. The restraint was sweet torture, but both of them wanted to do things right. One evening, about a month into their engagement, Laura was sewing by the fire when Henry came to sit beside her. "I have been thinking," he said. "Dangerous habit," Laura teased, not looking up from her stitching. "I want you to write to your family. Tell them you are alive and well and getting married." Laura's hands stilled. "Why?" They made their feelings clear. "Because they are your family, and you deserve the chance to reconcile if you want it, and because I do not want you to have regrets later." Henry covered her hand with his. "You do not have to forgive them for how they treated you, but you should tell them about your new life. Let them make the choice about whether to be part of it." Laura considered this. The idea of reaching out to her family filled her with anxiety, but Henry was right. She should at least tell them she was alive. "Will you help me write it?" "Of course." The letter took 3 drafts and was shorter than Laura had expected. She told them about the storm, about Henry saving her, about their engagement. She did not apologize for leaving or ask for their approval. She simply informed them of her new circumstances and where they could reach her if they chose to respond. "Think they will write back?" Laura asked as Henry prepared to take the letter to town. "I do not know, but at least you will know you tried." Henry made the trip to Boise and back in a day, pushing hard to minimize his time away from Laura. She hated being alone in the cabin now, not from fear but from missing him. It was both wonderful and terrifying how quickly she had become accustomed to his presence. When he returned, she threw herself into his arms. "Miss me?" he asked, laughing. "Desperately, do not leave me again." "I have to sometimes, love, but I will always come back, that is a promise." He kissed her soundly. "Besides, in a few weeks, you will be able to come with me when I make these trips." The wedding day arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. The minister, a kindly man named Reverend Matthews, rode up with 2 witnesses he had brought from Boise, a couple who ran the general store. They had never met Laura, but they smiled warmly and congratulated them both. Laura wore the dress she had sewn, simple blue wool that brought out her eyes. She had no veil, no flowers, no guests beyond the necessary witnesses. But when she stepped out of the cabin and saw Henry waiting for her in his best clothes, his hair and beard neatly trimmed, his eyes shining with love, she felt like the most blessed bride in the world. The ceremony was short and sweet. They stood in the snow outside the cabin, the mountains rising majestically around them, and spoke their vows. Laura's voice shook when she promised to love and honor Henry for the rest of her life, but not from doubt, from the sheer, overwhelming emotion of it all. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Henry kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. "Hello, Mrs. Nash," he whispered against her lips. "Hello, husband," she replied, and laughed at the sheer joy of it. They shared a simple meal with the minister and the witnesses, who then departed before the light failed, heading back down to Boise. And then Laura and Henry were alone, truly married, the night stretching before them full of promise. Henry built up the fire while Laura changed into the nightgown she had sewn for this night. Her hands trembled as she brushed out her hair, nervous despite everything they had shared. When she emerged from behind the screen, Henry looked up from the fire and went very still. "You are beautiful," he said, his voice rough. "So are you," Laura replied, and meant it. He had changed, too, into just his trousers and shirt, and she could see the strong lines of his body through the fabric. He crossed to her slowly, giving her time to adjust, and took her hands. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said. "We have the rest of our lives." "I am ready," Laura assured him. "I want this. I want you." What followed was tender and passionate and occasionally awkward in the way of first times, but it was theirs. Henry was gentle with her, patient, taking time to learn what she liked. And Laura discovered that the joy of physical intimacy was so much richer when it was rooted in real love and trust. Afterward, lying tangled together under the furs, Laura felt tears on her cheeks. "Did I hurt you?" Henry asked immediately, concerned. "No, no, you were perfect. This was perfect." Laura wiped at her eyes. "I just never thought I would feel this happy again. I thought that part of my life was over." Henry pulled her closer, kissing her forehead. "This is just the beginning, my love. We have so much life ahead of us." Laura fell asleep in her husband's arms, safer and more content than she had ever been. The winter deepened, and Laura settled into her new life with a sense of rightness she had never experienced before. She and Henry worked together seamlessly, building their life one day at a time. They expanded the trap lines, prepared for spring, and made plans for the future. 3 months after the wedding, a letter arrived. Henry brought it back from one of his supply runs, and Laura stared at the familiar handwriting on the envelope with trepidation. "From your mother," Henry said gently. Laura opened it with shaking hands. The letter was short but genuine. Her mother wrote that she was glad Laura was safe and happy, that she regretted the harshness of their parting. She did not apologize outright, but she asked if she could visit when the weather warmed, to meet Henry and see how Laura was doing. "What do you think?" Laura asked, passing the letter to Henry. He read it carefully. "I think she is trying in her way. The question is, do you want to see her?" Laura thought about it. The anger and hurt were still there, but they had lost some of their sharp edges. Her mother was flawed, shaped by her own rigid upbringing and limited understanding, but she was still her mother. "Yes," Laura decided. "I want her to see that I am happy, that I made the right choice." "Then we will welcome her when she comes," Henry said simply. Spring arrived with a rush of meltwater and budding trees. Laura discovered she was pregnant in late April, and the joy was tempered by fear until Henry held her through a long night of tears and promises. "We will get through this together," he vowed. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Laura's mother arrived in early May, traveling with Laura's younger brother, who Laura had always been closest to. The reunion was awkward at first, everyone dancing around the hurt that had passed. But then Laura's mother saw the cabin, the life Laura and Henry had built, the way they looked at each other, and something in her expression softened. "You chose well," she told Laura privately. "He is a good man, I can see that." "He is the best man I have ever known," Laura replied. "I am sorry," her mother said finally, fully. "I was wrong to push you. I was afraid for you, afraid of what would happen to a woman alone, and I let that fear make me cruel. Can you forgive me?" Laura had not expected forgiveness to come so easily. But looking at her mother, seeing genuine remorse, she found she could let go of the anger she had carried. "Yes," she said, "I forgive you." The visit was healing in ways Laura had not anticipated. Her brother delighted in Henry's mountain stories and begged to be taught to trap. Her mother helped Laura sew baby clothes and talked about Margaret without the dismissive attitude she had shown before, acknowledging Laura's grief as valid. When they left a week later, it was with promises to return and to write regularly. Laura stood with Henry, watching them ride away, and felt a sense of completion. She had made peace with her past. Now she could fully embrace her future. The baby was born in late November, a healthy boy with Henry's gray eyes and a lusty cry that spoke of strong lungs. They named him Thomas, after Henry's grandfather, who had been the one kind person in his childhood. Holding her son for the first time, Laura wept with relief and joy, and still some grief for the daughter who had not lived to be a big sister. But the grief was softer now, woven into the fabric of who she was rather than consuming her whole. "Thank you," she told Henry, who sat beside the bed looking dazed with new fatherhood. "For what? For finding me. For saving me. For giving me a reason to believe again." Laura looked down at tiny Thomas. "For giving me a family. You saved me too," Henry said softly. "I just did not realize I needed saving until you came along." They raised Thomas in the mountains, and 2 years later a daughter arrived whom they named Margaret Rose. Laura had been terrified to use her first daughter's name, afraid it would hurt too much. But Henry pointed out that it was a way to honor both the child they had lost and the new life they had been given. He was right. Little Maggie, as they called her, was her own person entirely, and saying her name brought joy rather than pain. More children followed. Another boy, then twin girls, then one more son. The cabin grew, just as Henry had promised, expanding into a real house with separate rooms and a wide porch. The ranch prospered. Henry's trap lines became supplemental income as they built up a small herd of cattle and a string of horses. Laura's family visited regularly, and over the years, the rifts healed. Her mother became a doting grandmother, and her siblings grew close to Henry. Considering him the brother they had never had, on their 10th anniversary, Henry took Laura back to the spot where he had found her wagon that day in the blizzard. Someone had dragged the wreckage away years ago, but they both knew the place. "I was thinking," Henry said, "about how this is where our story really started. You were frozen, lost, ready to give up, and God put me exactly where I needed to be." "I had stopped praying," Laura remembered. "I thought God was not listening. Maybe he was just waiting for the right moment to answer." Henry wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. "I thank him every day for that storm. Is that strange, to be grateful for something that almost killed you?" "No," Laura said softly, "because it brought me to you. It brought me home." They stood there as snow began to fall gently around them, not a blizzard this time, but a soft blessing. Laura thought about faith, about prayer, about how sometimes God's answers looked nothing like what you expected. She had prayed for her daughter to live, and that prayer had gone unanswered. But maybe, in a way, other prayers she had never voiced had been answered instead. Prayers for purpose, for love, for a reason to keep going. "I pray now," she told Henry. "Every night, prayers of gratitude mostly." "I do too," he admitted. "Mostly thanking God for you and our children, for this life we have built." Laura turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. His beard was threaded with gray now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting at mountain sun. But those eyes were still the same storm cloud gray that had looked at her with such kindness when she had nothing left to give. "I love you," she said. "More now than even that day I agreed to marry you." "I love you more," Henry countered, smiling. "Impossible." "Want to bet?" Laura laughed, and the sound echoed across the snowy clearing, full of joy and life and faith restored. They rode back to their home, where their children were waiting, where the fire was warm and the future stretched out bright before them. That night, after the children were all in bed, Laura stood at the window looking out at the mountains silvered by moonlight. Henry came to stand beside her, and they watched the night together in comfortable silence. "What are you thinking about?" he asked finally. "How I used to be so angry at God," Laura said, "for taking Margaret and my first husband, for letting me lose everything. But now I think maybe there was a plan I could not see. Not that God wanted them to die, but that he could take even that tragedy and weave it into something beautiful." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Henry assured her. "I do not think God causes the bad things." I think he walks with us through them and helps us find our way to the other side. You were my way to the other side, Laura said, leaning into him. My mountain cowboy, finding me when I was frozen and lost. And you were mine, Henry replied. My fierce woman who taught me that faith is not about never doubting. It is about believing anyway. They went to bed shortly after, curled together as they had every night for 10 years. And Laura, who had once stopped praying entirely, whispered a prayer of gratitude into the darkness. For her husband, for her children, for second chances and mountain storms and the man who had taught her to believe again. The years continued to pass, measured in seasons and children growing, and the slow, steady building of a life well lived. Thomas grew tall and serious, taking after his father in temperament. Maggie was wild and fearless, always climbing trees and riding horses too fast. The twins, Sarah and Rachel, were inseparable and clever, constantly getting into mischief. The younger boys, David and James, were still small enough to cling to Laura's skirts and beg for stories. The ranch prospered beyond Henry and Laura's initial dreams. They hired help eventually, young men from Boise looking for work and a chance to learn the mountain trade. Henry taught them with the same patient kindness he showed his own children, and several of them eventually started their own homesteads nearby. A small community grew in the foothills, families drawn by the opportunity and held together by the rough generosity that was the code of the mountains. There was a one-room schoolhouse eventually, and Laura took turns with other mothers teaching the children. A circuit preacher came through monthly, and they held services in the schoolhouse. Laura found herself taking in women sometimes, the way Henry had taken her in. Women escaping bad situations, women widowed or lost or just needing a fresh start. She gave them work on the ranch, a safe place to stay, and the kind of non-judgmental support she wished she had received from her own community after her husband died. You are building your own ministry, Henry observed one evening, watching her rock a baby whose mother was recovering from childbirth in their spare room. I am just doing what you taught me, Laura replied, showing up for people when they need it most. That is more than most people ever do, Henry said, pride evident in his voice. Their own children grew and began to fly the nest. Thomas at 18 announced he wanted to study medicine, inspired by the doctor in Boise who had helped deliver his youngest siblings. Laura and Henry scraped together the money to send him east to medical school, trusting he would return to serve the mountain communities. Maggie married at 20 to a rancher's son who was one of the few men wild enough to keep up with her. They started their own spread just a valley over, close enough to visit but far enough to be independent. The twins went to teachers' college together, returning to run the growing school that now had 2 rooms and served children from miles around. David decided to take over the ranch, working alongside Henry and learning everything his father could teach. James, the baby, showed a gift for working with horses and began breeding a line that became sought after throughout Idaho territory. Laura and Henry found themselves entering middle age with their children launched into the world but still close, a web of family that extended across the mountains. Grandchildren began to arrive, and Laura delighted in being a grandmother in a way her own mother had not been able to be until late in life due to their estrangement. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around. There was music and dancing and so much food the tables groaned. At some point in the evening, Henry pulled Laura aside. "Come with me," he said, that familiar spark of mischief in his eyes. He led her away from the celebration, up the path to the spot where the new house stood. But they did not go inside. Instead, he took her to the porch that overlooked the valley, where they had sat countless evenings watching the sun set. "I have something for you," Henry said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, delicate gold set with a small sapphire. Laura gasped. "Henry, we cannot afford this." "We can, actually. The ranch had a good year. Besides, I should have given you a ring 25 years ago, but we were too poor and too practical. I wanted to remedy that." He took the ring from the box and slid it onto her finger, beside the simple gold band she had worn since their wedding. 25 years, Laura, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Laura threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. "I love you. I love you so much." "I love you too. Always have, always will." They stood there wrapped in each other, the sounds of celebration drifting up from below, and Laura marveled at the life they had built. She thought about the woman she had been, frozen and lost and faithless. That woman felt like someone else entirely, someone she remembered with compassion but no longer knew. "You ever think about how different things would be if you had not found me?" she asked. "Sometimes. But not often. I prefer to focus on the life we have, not the lives we might have had." Henry kissed her forehead. "Although I admit, I cannot imagine my life without you. It would have been so much emptier." "Mine too," Laura agreed. "I thought I was starting over when I headed to Boise. But really, I was just running. You gave me something to build toward instead of away from." They rejoined the party, dancing together as their children and grandchildren watched with obvious affection. Laura caught her mother's eye across the room and saw tears on the older woman's cheeks. They had had many long conversations over the years, healing old wounds and building new understanding. Her mother had admitted that seeing Laura's happiness had changed her own perspective on faith and family. "She is a different woman than she was," Laura had told Henry once. "People can change when they are given the chance," he had replied. "Look at us. We are nothing like the people we were when we met." It was true. Laura had been frozen, broken, faithless. Henry had been isolated, afraid of connection, running from his past. Together, they had thawed and healed and grown. The seasons continued their endless dance. Winter storms that reminded Laura of that first blizzard, though now she watched them from the safety of a warm house with her husband beside her. Springs that brought new calves and foals and the miracle of life renewing itself. Summers of hard work and long, golden evenings. Autumns that painted the mountains in shades of fire before the world turned white again. Laura's hair turned gray, then white. Henry's beard went completely silver. Their hands grew gnarled with age and work, but they still reached for each other in the night, still found comfort in simple touch. On a cold morning in their 42nd year of marriage, Henry woke before dawn as always. Laura felt him slip from the bed and listened to him build up the fire. But instead of heading out to do chores, he came back to bed, sliding under the covers and pulling her close. "Not working this morning?" she asked, surprised. "David can handle things. I want to spend the day with my wife." Henry nuzzled her neck. "We have earned some leisure in our old age." Laura laughed. "Old age, speak for yourself." They spent the day doing simple things, walking through the snow to check on the horses, sitting by the fire reading from books their grandchildren had given them, cooking a meal together, moving around the kitchen with the practiced ease of decades together. That evening, Henry played his harmonica, the same battered instrument his mother had given him so many years ago. Laura sang along, her voice not as strong as it once was, but still true. When the last notes faded, they sat in comfortable silence. "I have been thinking," Henry said eventually. "Still dangerous," Laura teased, echoing words from their early days. "About faith. About how you said you stopped praying and I helped you believe again." He took her hand. "But the truth is, you helped me believe too. I had this idea of God as distant, disinterested in the daily struggles of people. But loving you, building this life with you, watching our children and grandchildren grow, All of it has shown me that God is in the details, in the small kindnesses and the everyday miracles. Laura squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with tears. We saved each other. We did, Henry agreed, in every way that matters. They went to bed early, tired from a full day of living. Laura fell asleep in Henry's arms, as she had nearly every night for 42 years, and dreamed of mountains and music and love that transcended time. The years softened into a gentle rhythm. Laura and Henry grew old together with grace, supported by their children and surrounded by grandchildren who adored them. They became the heart of their mountain community, the couple everyone pointed to as an example of what love could be when tended carefully. Thomas returned from medical school and set up practice in Boise, but he visited often, bringing his own wife and children. Maggie's ranch thrived, her wildness channeled into building something lasting. The twins shaped young minds with wisdom and compassion. David ran the Nash ranch with the same careful stewardship his father had modeled. James's horses were known throughout Idaho and beyond. Laura and Henry celebrated their 50th anniversary, surrounded by so much family they could barely fit everyone in the expanded house. 5 children, 18 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren with more on the way. We built something good, Henry said that night, the two of them finally alone in their room. We built something beautiful, Laura corrected. Something that will outlast us. Are you afraid? Henry asked. Of what comes next, I mean. We are getting old, love. Our time is not infinite. Laura considered this. No, I am not afraid. I have had a full life, Henry, more than I ever dreamed possible when I was freezing in that wagon. If I died tomorrow, I would die grateful. Well, I would prefer you did not die tomorrow, Henry said gruffly. I am not done with you yet. Laura laughed and kissed him. Good, because I am not done with you either. They had another 5 years together, 5 years of watching their family grow and their community thrive. Henry's health began to fail slowly, his strong body finally wearing down after 8 decades of hard work and hard living. But his mind stayed sharp, and his love for Laura never dimmed. On a spring morning when Laura was 72 and Henry was 79, he did not wake up. Laura found him beside her, peaceful in death as he had been in life, and though her heart shattered, she also felt grateful that he had gone gently, without suffering. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Idaho territory. People came from the mining camps, from Boise, from neighboring ranches and towns. They came to honor a man who had lived with integrity and kindness, who had built a legacy of generosity and faith. Laura stood by his grave, her children and grandchildren around her, and spoke the eulogy herself because no one else could have captured what Henry meant. He saved my life, she said simply. I was lost and frozen and faithless, and he found me. He taught me to believe again, in God, in goodness, in love. He gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. And now he is gone ahead, and I will miss him every day until I join him again. The community rallied around Laura in her grief, the same way she had rallied around so many others over the years. Her children wanted her to move to Boise, to live with one of them where they could care for her. But Laura refused. This ranch is where I met your father. It is where we built our life. I am not leaving it until they carry me out, she told them firmly. So she stayed, David and his family living in the house with her, but Laura maintaining her independence and her routines. She still took in women who needed help, still taught at the school occasionally, still sang hymns while she worked. People marveled at her strength, but Laura knew it was not strength. It was faith. The faith Henry had helped her rebuild brick by brick over 55 years of marriage. Faith that this life was not all there was, that she would see him again. Faith that even in grief, there was still purpose and love to be found. Laura lived another 8 years after Henry died, long enough to see all her grandchildren grown, to meet great-great-grandchildren, to know that the legacy they had built was secure. She spent those years pouring love into everyone around her, being the kind of grandmother she had wished for as a child. On a cold winter morning, much like the one when Henry had found her all those years ago, Laura did not wake up. She had gone to sleep the night before after a full day of living, surrounded by family, having laughed and eaten and told stories. And she simply slipped away in her sleep, peacefully, to where Henry was waiting. At her funeral, the minister read a letter Laura had left, to be opened after her death. "To my beloved family," it began. "If you are reading this, then I have gone to be with your father and grandfather. Do not mourn me too much. I have lived a full and beautiful life, far beyond what I deserved or expected. I was given a second chance when I had lost all hope, and I tried to honor that gift by living well and loving fiercely. Remember that faith is not about having all the answers. It is about believing there is light even in the darkest night. Remember that love is the most powerful force in the world, worth fighting for and holding on to. And remember that the mountains hold their own kind of grace, harsh and beautiful and true. Thank you for making my life so rich. Thank you for being the family I dreamed of. I will be watching over you until we meet again. All my love, always." They buried Laura beside Henry on a hill overlooking the valley, where they could watch over the ranch and the family they had built together. The headstone was simple. Laura Vance Nash, 1851–1931. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she believed. And generations later, when their great-great-grandchildren told the story of how the Nash family began, they spoke of a frozen woman who had given up praying and the mountain cowboy who made her believe again. They spoke of faith restored and love triumphant, and the power of showing up for someone when they needed it most. They spoke of a legacy built not on wealth or fame, but on kindness and commitment and the daily choice to build something beautiful together. The ranch still stood, expanded and modernized, but still recognizably the place Henry and Laura had built. The mountains still rose majestically against the sky, holding their secrets and their grace. And somewhere in the wind that whistled through the pines, you could almost hear the sound of a harmonica playing and a voice singing along. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and held on through everything life could throw at them. Their story became legend in Idaho, passed down through generations as an example of what love could be. The frozen woman and the mountain cowboy, two broken people who healed each other and built a dynasty of faith and family that outlasted them both. It was a story that started with a blizzard and a prayer that was not quite spoken, answered by a man following an instinct he did not quite understand. A story of death and rebirth, of loss and finding, of giving up and learning to hope again. Most of all, it was a love story. The kind that reminded people that even in the hardest times, even when faith seems impossible, there is still light to be found, still reasons to keep going, still people who will show up and save you if you can just hold on long enough to be found. And in the end, is that not what faith really is? The belief that even in the frozen darkness, spring will come again. That even when we have given up praying, someone somewhere is still listening. That love, true love, can thaw even the most frozen heart and make us believe in miracles again. Laura and Henry Nash proved that truth with their lives, and their legacy lived on long after they were gone, a testament to the power of second chances and the grace found in the most unexpected places.